I love learning new things. I proudly tout my status of being a jack of all trades and a master of none. If you looked at my Udemy list, you would see classes on programming, art, music, and even marketing. My YouTube listening is more of the same, full of game dev, quantum physics, and automotive repair. Now, some of these videos I just listen to because I have an interest in the subject, but I have no interest in using the knowledge. For example, I have no intent in creating a particle accelerator, working in nuclear fusion, or becoming an art historian. While going down this path of digital learning and practically consuming educational content for entertainment purposes, I've discovered that unless you're actively using what you've learned, you don't really gain much. This is where I think many developers, and honestly most people learning any new craft, get caught in tutorial hell. For those of you that are unfamiliar, tutorial hell is the idea that you're not good enough to create your own project. So instead of creating, you just watch videos in hope of eventually attaining the skill to teach you what you need to know. This outlook is completely wrong. I'm not saying that a tutorial can't teach you anything. I own a bunch of programming books that are currently on my bedside. But the act of reading or watching alone isn't going to suffice. Eventually, you're going to have to apply what you learned in some way. This is why most schools have students do classwork, projects, and take tests. You need to do things to reinforce what you've learned. Without reinforcement, at most you're at a very basic level of knowledge. Maybe you'll know some key words, have an idea of some very high-level concepts, but more than likely, you won't have enough understanding to apply what you've actually learned. This is why, as a game dev, if you truly want to learn, you're better off writing your own code instead of just using the code that is found in tutorials or forums, or whatever you purchase from an asset pack or generated from AI. I'm not saying to never consult the internet. I do it from time to time, but most of my code is directly written from me. So it's obvious I have other interests, such as writing a novel, producing an album, creating a comic book, and of course, making games. Despite not being where I want to be on bass guitar or piano, I've made a ton of songs, and technically was the executive producer of an album. I've published a number of games, without knowing half of what I currently know about programming. I technically started working on a comic book and novel as well, but those are far less developed, so we won't talk about those. But even though I'm not quite where I want to be as a writer, and definitely nowhere where I want to be as an artist, I still begun the journey of applying what I know. So what gives me the confidence to work on anything, knowing I haven't yet mastered my craft? Well, that comes from a lack of fear of making something bad. Now let me explain. I know from firsthand experience that no project you want to do will ever come out exactly as you've envisioned it in your mind. You can get really close, but it will never be exact, and you will always find the flaws. I also know when you study any new trade or hobby, no matter how much you study, your first attempt, and likely your first few, are going to be pretty bad. Tutorials and lessons can teach you a wealth of knowledge. However, I can promise you, I've learned just as much, if not more, working on projects and little tasks I've created for myself, rather than watching tutorials or reading. I'm not saying that tutorials aren't helpful. They do serve a purpose, but making things, even if they are bad, will teach you much more about the process. If you practice to make art by just drawing basic shapes and lines over and over again, sure, you might have the steadiest hand in the world, but that alone doesn't make you a good artist. Most crafts blend a number of skills and techniques together, which aren't fully understood until you actually begin to apply those. Creating actual projects while learning also helps you create milestones for your progress. And as an added bonus, in the end, you would have actually made a thing. Sure, that thing might not be up to the standards that you would like, and if you're like me, it most likely will never be. But the act of making a thing is why most creatives do what they do in the first place. Now, this is where you're all going to roll your eyes, as I suggest that you start with something small. If you're a game dev, create a small arcadey game. If you're a writer, write a short story. If you want to make comics, make a 4-panel comic. And if you're a musician, just create a song. You don't have to share these creations with the world, at least not if you don't want to. But in the middle of the pursuit of your learning, just create, and create often. Also, create small tasks for yourself to accomplish, just like you would back in school. Assign due dates to yourself to reinforce the urgency of you actually completing those tasks. Once you've done this for a while, the gains will begin to stack up, If you're a game dev, a series of small arcade games can become a WarioWare-style collection. If you're a writer, you may have just created your own anthology. For a comic book artist, you might have your first issue. And the musician now has an album's worth of music. Remember, progress is made in inches, not miles. And so are creations. Hand cannon comes from a series of things I've created over time. If I had only done tutorials over all those years rather than making things, I wouldn't know half the tricks and better ways of doing things as I did. I also doubt that I would have had the fortitude to actually see the game through. So to the person trapped in tutorial hell, using the perpetual will of education to procrastinate, take a few days away from YouTube or Udemy and make something. Nothing big. It doesn't have to be anything for the public. It can be something just for you. Once you're done, you can get back to learning if you want. But every week or so, take some time away from practice and make something. You just might be surprised at the results. Well, that's it for today, everyone. Thanks for watching, and thanks for your time.